Let's go ahead and jump in. So we'll go over the dashboard theme and data. We'll look at some background Tableau information that's good to know before we get started. And then we can jump right into the example and demo portion, which is the majority of the training. So for the training dashboard that we're going to be working with today, I didn't want to use anything super serious or people get caught up in the numbers and all that. So we're going to use a Game of Thrones dashboard. So we've got 4 visualizations here on our dashboard. There are 2 that we're inviting viewers to interact with, and then we've got 2 here that are just kind of static. We'll show them how many deaths there were in each book in the series. So the second one here goes through the books compared to which season was based on that book and how many notable deaths there were in that season. Then we've got a graph here at the top that show the various attacking kings and their win percentages in battle. And then we've got one about the various houses. And you can click on those and you'll see people who are in that house, whether they're alive and dead, things of that nature. So let's get a little pop-up here like that will show you some battles they were involved in, the attacking and defending sides, whether they won, how big their armies were, all that sort of stuff. So that's basically the dashboard that we will be working with. With the Tableau information, there's really just 3 kind of points that I like to share before we get started. The first one is talking about summary data. And so there may be, or there often are questions, what data is being sent from Tableau to Wordsmith, or how can I see what Wordsmith is receiving from Tableau? And so if I go into my actual dashboard here, I can choose, let's say I'll just pick like this visualization here. And then if I go up to the top to analysis and view data, that's going to bring me here to this summary data tab. So everything that I see on this summary data tab is what Tableau is going to send to Wordsmith, or that's the data that Wordsmith will have available to write your insights. There's also a full data tab here at the bottom where you can see like all the data that's powering that visualization, but only the stuff that's on the summary tab is what Wordsmith will have access to. So if you know that you want to write about a particular data point, but you don't see it here in the summary data for whatever visualization you're focusing on or whatever worksheet, you will need to add that in so that Wordsmith has access to it. The other one is talking about new sheets. And so this kind of goes hand in hand with that summary data. If you are trying to write about a specific data point and you're not seeing it in the summary data tab, you need to obviously add it to your Tableau dashboard. Or at least to a worksheet within Tableau. And so you could do that by editing any of the existing sheets that you're currently using, or you could just add a new sheet to the dashboard. So let's come over here and just add a new sheet. And I'll just drag some random measure over here. It doesn't really matter what, as long as we have something. And so now that I've added this new sheet, essentially what we advise people to do is to create a new sheet, put whatever data you need access to on it, and then drag that onto your dashboard as a floating object. And you can pretty much just shrink that down super tiny and just tuck it away in a corner somewhere where nobody's really ever going to click on it. And now it's been added to the dashboard. It's not messing up your nice view that you took time to set up, but you can now feed that data over to Wordsmith because the sheet is part of the dashboard. And then the last one here is filters and visualizations. This is just kind of a reminder. Probably doesn't need to be said, but I like to point it out anyway. Just keep in mind what you are filtering when it comes to your visualizations, what is filtered and what isn't. And so generally that's going to be something that people are clicking on, can change that filter data. Whereas if I have my TV show notable death visualization here, we can see it is not being filtered. So if somebody clicks on any of these, it's not going to affect what's being sent to Wordsmith. However, if we look at like the attacker win percentage, which is being filtered, if I don't select anything and I come up here and look at that summary data, I can see all the attacker kings and their win percentages. But let's say I choose like Robb Stark. And now if I go view the data, we can see that that's filtered down and Wordsmith is only seeing information about the one person that I have selected. And so just keep that in mind. If you are filtering a sheet and someone makes a selection, it's going to change what's being sent over to Wordsmith. And so just be wary of what you're trying to write and how that can be affected if people do make a selection combined with those filters. And in one of our later sessions, we'll actually focus specifically on how to write narrative to account for those user selections. But just like to make you aware up front that that will obviously affect the data that's being sent over. So that's pretty much the just the background info that I wanted to give out. This is just our typical training roadmap. So right now we're here in session 1. We're going to talk about the basic functionality. We'll go into the calc builder so you can see how to create calcs from our underlying data, how to insert and format data variables. We'll explore the various functions that are in Wordsmith, and then we'll add a little bit of variability via synonyms. And then our next session, which we'll pick up on Friday, is where we'll really get into the meat of it. We'll start writing branches and all the best practices that go along with that, which is where you'll see the real power of Wordsmith. You can use that built-in logic to start really pulling out those insights from your data. All right. Any questions before we get into the actual examples?
No.
All right.
No.
Cool. So basically, what we're going to do today is we're going to answer 5 questions from that Game of Thrones dashboard. And actually, before we get into that, let me show you real fast here. So I know that one of the main things you said is you wanted to know how to connect Wordsmith with Tableau, not just how it works, but how to actually connect it up. And so I haven't connected to a project yet, so we'll go ahead and walk through that. I have my Wordsmith extension plugged into my dashboard here. And so all you have to do is come down to connect account. I assume you guys already have an account. If not, you can do get started and register and all of that. But once you have an account, you just say connect. It's going to pop up here.
Get the extension into Tableau?
So someone should have sent you that. Does anybody have a copy of our T-Rex file? I'll take that as a no. Okay, let me make a note. Let me make a note to send that over.
Does your amount of deaths include dire wolves?
Unfortunately, I do not believe it does. I think it's only people. That's a great question, though. I like it. Let's see. Send T-Rex file. All right. So I'll try to remember. I made a note, so hopefully I will remember. When I send you guys over the recording and slide deck and all of that, I'll also send you a T-Rex file, which is the Wordsmith extension. And you basically just drag that right into your dashboard. Or I'm sorry, you don't drag that in your dashboard. You use the extension object here. And then once you drag it in, it's going to pop up and ask you to choose an extension. And you'll just pick the one that I send you over.
Okay.
And then that'll load up the extension here in the little widget. Then we just say connect account. And it's going to ask you for an integration name. You can call that whatever you want. It's basically your project name. So we'll just call this, let's say, progressive training. And then what we need to do is select which worksheets from this dashboard do you want to feed data into Wordsmith. And so when I click this drop down, all the worksheets that I see here happen to also be the same worksheets that you can see over in Tableau. And so basically you just pick one. It'll give you a little preview and you just say save table. It's going to add it over here.
Will only the worksheets in your current dashboard show up? Or like if I had other worksheets that are not being used in the dashboard, do those become available in that drop down, or just what's in the dashboard?
Only the ones that are in the dashboard. And that's why, okay, like if you do have one you want to use that's not technically part of the dashboard, that's
what you're saying, like the hidden floating one, like sheet 11. Okay, yep, that makes sense.
Perfect. So you just select it, hit save. It'll move it over here to the right, which are under tables to save. So anything you see in this column, once I hit save integration, is what's going to get integrated with Wordsmith. All right. So I think these are the ones that I want to add. And then I'll just hit save integration. Now it's saved. The extension will reload, and it says, welcome to Wordsmith's integration. And so now that means I've now connected to Wordsmith. All those worksheets that I just saved have been fed over to my project. And now I could either log into my Wordsmith account via my browser and then access the project there, or from the extension, if you click the little 3 dots here in the top corner, there's an option to edit your Wordsmith template. And that will automatically load it up in your browser and take you right into the project. If you come through your account, you'll just see a project will be listed and you can click to go into it from your main dashboard. Now that I'm in here, I'm in the editor, and this is just like any word processor you've ever used. You can type, and then there's basically 2 main sections of the Wordsmith program that you're going to be using. There's the left navigation over here where we have 2 different tabs, calculate and write, and then the 4 main buttons up here at the top. We have insert data, which if I currently click is empty. And so this is where we will use our calculate or calc builder to surface data variables that we want to write about from those Tableau worksheets. Once we do that, they'll show up here in insert data, and we can just click on them to insert them in our template. We can also add synonyms to add variability to the template, and then branching, which is again where we'll use our conditional logic to compare different data variables to write our insights. That's kind of the main layout. And again, insert data initially completely empty. It tells us we do need to create some calcs before we can surface this data. And so now that we are connected, we can go ahead and start answering our questions and pulling out some insights from that data. So the first thing we want to know from our dashboard is, on average, how many more notable deaths were there in seasons that were based on books versus seasons that were not based on books? At the time that I created this dashboard, I believe there were 7. All the current books were out, but only like 6 seasons of the show, or the final season hasn't quite aired yet. But there are differing numbers of deaths in the books, seasons that are based on books versus seasons that are not. We just want to know what's the difference. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this insight, and I'll go ahead and paste that right here in my template. Well, maybe not. Let's try that again. I'm glad that wasn't something terrible in my paste there. That would have been embarrassing. There we go. All right.
There'll be plenty of time for embarrassment.
I agree. Just getting warmed up. Okay. So now that we've got this in here, and real quick before we go into the calc builder, I'll also show you, this is basically a real-time connection. So now that I've typed that in there, if I come back over to Tableau, when I click these 3 dots, there's also an option here to refresh the narrative. And if I do that, we can now see exactly what I just put into the Wordsmith template. So as soon as I add something over there and refresh on the Tableau side, it'll show up. All right. And so now to answer this question, we need to pull 2 data variables from our worksheets. We need to know the average number of notable deaths from seasons that were based on books and the average number of deaths from seasons that were not based on books. And then to find the difference, obviously, we're just going to subtract one from the other, and that will give us our variable to answer our question. To do that, I'll come over here to the calc builder. And once I come here, this is where I'm going to access all of those worksheets that we added at the beginning that are coming from Tableau. You can see the name of all those same worksheets that I added are here. And if I scroll down, all 8 or 9 that I added are available. And then when I'm ready to start surfacing that data, I just need to pick which worksheet the data I'm looking for lives in and say create new calc or new calc up here on the right. They both do the same thing. And so for this particular scenario, I'm going to use this TV show notable deaths worksheet. So I'll say create new calc, and that's going to bring me here into the calc builder. So the first thing it's going to ask me to do over here is give my calc a name. And so I'm going to go ahead and call this my average TV deaths based on books. And I'm going to say Y for yes, and then we'll do another one for no, since we're looking for the deaths from seasons that are and are not based on books. So now that I've given it a name, I can now use different functions on the table of data that we see here at the bottom to surface whatever information I happen to be looking for. It will show you a preview of the data table. This one's fairly small, so we can basically see the whole thing. But I believe it'll only show you like the first 10 or 15 rows here and the first 10 or 15 columns. You can usually scroll over a little bit. Anything outside of that, you wouldn't be able to see in the preview, but it just gives you an idea of the data that you're working with. And then here in the functions, there's all sorts of different functions that we can perform. Some are much more common than others. The ones that you'll probably use very, very often, aggregate, which I'm sure we all know what that does, just mathematically aggregates values in a particular column. Aggregate row, also very common, just lets you do math across the rows instead of in a column. Filter, also super common, lets me filter my data. I can choose any column and filter on that column. I can also filter on other calcs that I've created. We don't have any yet, but once we have created some additional calcs, you can filter on other calcs even from other sheets. First in, super common, lets you keep only the first row. So maybe once we have done some aggregation, some filtering, we only want to keep the very first row. So we'll do that first in. Group lets me group data by a unique value in a column or a set of columns, and then aggregate based on another column. And we're going to do all of these at one time or another over the course of the training. So hopefully they'll make more sense when we actually do them if they're not right now. Last in, just like first in, but lets you keep the last row. Inth lets you specify what exact row you want to keep. Select, that's typically the very last step in a calc. You do your aggregations, your filtering, your sorting, and so on. And then you can choose to select only the columns that you want to keep for that particular calc. Sort just lets you sort the column, alphabetically or in numerical order, high, low, or low to high. And unique lets you return the unique values of a selected column. So if you have a column that has some things repeating, you can pull out just the unique values of that column. Those are all the common ones. There are also a few others that don't get used that often, but they are available, like change over time. If you have timestamps in your data, as well as numerical values, we can calculate the change over time for, say, like the last quarter, last year, and so on. There's an index function which returns the row number in which whatever specific value you're looking for appears. I've never actually even seen somebody use that in practice, but it is there if you ever need it. And there's a map date time. If you have timestamps, you can extract parts of that timestamp as well and insert it into your template. So you could say, on the 10th day of May or whatever, and you can pull those timestamps out and insert them right into the template. Those aren't used that often, or at least that I've seen. But the ones I mentioned at first are super common. You'll use them all the time. All right. Okay. And so to kind of put this into practice, to pull out our first variable here, we're looking for the average number of deaths that are from seasons based on books. And so the first thing, if I look at my table, I can see that I have a column that shows the season number, which book that season was predominantly based on, and the number of deaths from that season. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to filter this table. And I'm only want to look at seasons that are based on books. And we can see that season 7 here is not based on a book. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to say, let's make sure that that predominant book column is not null. And so that's going to get rid of anything that's null, only giving me seasons that are based on books. Go ahead and save that step. We'll see that it gets added over here to the right. It shows me I'm filtering, and it tells me what I'm filtering on. As you build out your calc, you'll see each step listed here. You can edit or delete those steps as you're working or when you come back. And so now that I have got rid of anything that is not based on a book, I'm just going to do an aggregation. Since I already have a column that tells me the number of deaths from each of those seasons, I'm looking for the average across all of them. I'm going to aggregate on the notable death column, and I'm just going to take the average of all of those deaths. So now that I've saved it, I have one column here with the average number of deaths from all those seasons that were not based on books. So now I can save that calc. And if I pop back out here to the right tab real quick and I go to insert data, what previously was empty when we first loaded this up now has one variable available, which is that calc that I just created. So for however many data variables we need for our template, you're going to have to do a calc to surface each one of those. And so now that I have the number from seasons that are based on books, I basically want to do the exact same thing, except for seasons that are not based on books. And so I could go back here to create a new calc and just do the exact same steps I did previously, or you can save yourself a little bit of time. You can also copy calcs that you've already created. So I'm going to copy that, and I'll just edit my name here. So we'll say seasons based on books no instead of yes. Copy that calc, and it's going to bring me up to the exact place I was when I initially saved it. I can see the steps that I previously performed. And so in my original calc, I've filtered to say, get rid of any column where the predominant book is not null. Here, I just want to flip that around. And so I'm going to go to my initial filter step. If I click these three dots, I have the option to edit that step. And now I can update my filter. So instead of saying is not null, let's focus only on the predominant book column that is null, which in this case is only one. Once I save that, it'll update the filter, and then it will go ahead and perform that aggregation again, which gives me the number of deaths from seasons that were not based on books. Now, you probably noticed in the initial table that there was only one season that was not based on a book, so we could have just used that number. But to future-proof your calcs, it's a good idea to go ahead and leave that aggregation step in there, because if we add additional seasons that perhaps may not be based on books, that number is going to change and the aggregation will become important. And so even though there's only one now, I would go ahead and leave it to account for future data that might be added. So I'll go ahead and save this calc as well. And now we have the two data points that we needed. We have the number of deaths from seasons that are and are not based on books, and we just need to subtract one from the other. And so to do that, we can create a formula which lets us do some basic math on our data points. If I come back here to the right tab and I go to the Insert Data button, you'll see a Create Formula option. And here I can go ahead and create a formula. In this case, I'm going to call it the different average TV deaths. And then I'm just going to say, let's take the number of deaths that are based on books, and we'll subtract that from the ones that are not. And then it'll give me my answer here. I'll go ahead and say create. It'll save that formula. And now when I come to insert data, I have my two variables that I pulled from my calcs, and my formula will be listed here as well. Anytime you create a formula, it'll put it at the bottom of your data variables. It'll always say edit formula out next to it, and you can click that to come back in and update your formula at any time. And so now that we have that settled, we can basically just replace the placeholder here in our sentence with that variable. And so I'll say insert data, choose my formula. And once I insert a data variable, it's going to pop up and show me the formatting options for that particular data type. And so there are various data types that you can use in Wordsmith, numbers, text, lists, a couple other ones that we'll get to. But each one is going to have its own specific formatting options. So for numbers, you can choose like how many decimal places, if any, you want to show. You also get a preview here at the top of what that's going to look like. So you can kind of change these around and see what you prefer. If it's a large number, you can choose your thousands separator. You can also do some transformations like ordinal endings, take the absolute value, multiply by 100, which you pretty much always do when you're working with percentages. Or you can choose to write these numbers out as words, just the small ones, every number. You can see it'll write that out. Or you can customize if you only want to write out large numbers. You can choose how many decimal places to show for each one. And so those are, anytime I insert a number, I'm going to have these same formatting options. And then if I insert a text variable, it'll have its own set, a list. Each different data type will have its own specific set of formatting options. Once you are happy with the formatting, everything's the way you want it, you just hit done. And now it's going to insert that variable. And so now I can see that on average, there are 22 more notable deaths in seasons that were based on books. And if I pop back over to my dashboard and refresh, we get the same thing.
Cool.
Hooray. All right, so let's go take a look at another one. So for this one, we want to know, whoops, I muted myself. So for this one, we want to know which book had the most deaths and how many deaths were there in that particular book. And so for this, we also have two variables that we need to pull out. We need to discover which book has the most deaths, and then how many deaths were in that particular book. And then once we find those two variables, we can write out an insight that looks something like this here. So book number, whatever the number, has the most deaths with this many characters dying. And obviously to get those two variables, we're going to need to come back to calculate. And in this particular case, I'm going to be working in this death by book worksheet. So I'll come here and create a new calc. And the first thing I want to do is identify which book has the most deaths. And so I'll go ahead and call this variable max deaths book. And if we look at the table, this is a fairly simple table. We have 5 different books and the count of deaths from each one of those books. And then there's some aggregation here in the middle that I don't know what it is, so we can ignore that. But if we are looking for which of these books has the most number of deaths, the first thing I would want to do probably is sort on that column that shows the number of deaths. So I can choose to sort by that column. And we're going to sort in descending order. Once I save it, it's going to put the one with the highest number at the top, obviously. And then I'm going to choose the first in function because I only want to keep that first row because I'm just looking for the top one. So now I've identified which book number it had the most deaths and how many deaths there were. But again, I don't really need this middle column. I only need these two variables to complete my insight. So now I'm going to use that select function, which lets me choose which columns I want to keep or discard. And I'm going to say, let's keep the book number and let's keep the number of deaths, but let's get rid of this middle column because we don't need it. And once I save that, I now have my two variables that I'm looking for. One thing I'll definitely point out here, you may have noticed when we created our first two calcs, at the end, right before we saved them, we had one column with a number in it or one square with a number in it. When I saved that, and then we looked at the insert data button, we had one variable to correspond to that one column that we saved in the calc. With this particular calc, because we're saving two columns, we'll now have two new data variables, one for each column. So anytime I save a calc with multiple columns, each one of those columns is going to become its own separate data variable. And the way that it'll handle the naming is it'll add the name of the calc first, and then the name of the column. So we'll have the max death book of death and the max death book count of deaths. Two different variables from one calc. On the flip side, if you save a calc with a single column but multiple rows, that will still only show up as one variable, and it will turn itself into a list because you have multiple rows becoming a list of items, whereas multiple columns will become separate, distinct variables that can be inserted. So once I go ahead and save this, if I pop back out to right and I go look, we now have two new variables, even though we only created one calc, one identifying the book and the number of deaths from that book. And so again, we can just replace our placeholders here. First, the book itself. And again, we got the same number formatting options. Let's say maybe I'll write this one out. Anything less than 10, we'll just write out as a word. And then the number of characters that died in that book. And we know that book number 3 has the most deaths with 97 characters dying. What are we looking for here? So for this one, we're going to pull out an extra variable, get a little more complicated here. Obviously, each one's going to get a little more complex. So for this, we want to know who wrote the most episodes and what percentage of those episodes did that person or persons happen to write. And so for this, we need to know who is the writer with the highest number of episodes. And then if we're looking for the percentage of episodes that person wrote, we need to know the number of episodes that top writer was responsible for, as well as the total number of episodes in the entire series. So we can divide one by the other and get the percentage of episodes for our most prolific writer. And then that'll allow us to create an insight that looks basically like this right here, where we will say this writer wrote this percent of the episodes, which were in fact the most of any writer. And I'll go ahead and paste that in. And once again, we need to come back to our calc builder to surface these variables. So the first thing I'll look for here is let's identify our top writer who wrote the most episodes. And for that, I'm going to come down here to a worksheet called TV Show Data. And I'll create a new calc. And for this particular table, here's one that is a little bit bigger so you can see that you can scroll over and see several columns. This table shows me each season of the show. Or actually, it's broken down by episode. So we have each individual episode, which season it occurred in, the number that episode appeared in that particular season, the name of the episode, who wrote it, who directed it, and there's a bunch of ratings and information and stuff like that over here that we don't really care about right now. Mostly what we're concerned with is who wrote this episode because we're trying to identify our top writer. So I'll go ahead and call this variable top writer. And then so to identify our top writer, we're obviously going to focus on this writer column. And to do that, I'm going to use the group function, which again lets me group by a column, by unique values in a particular column, and then aggregate on a different column. So if I say group, and I want to group by, and then it'll ask me which column do I want to group by. In this case, I want to group by the writer. So that's going to pull out the unique values in that writer column. And then for my aggregation, I'm going to say let's aggregate on the episode name, and we'll just do a count of those episode names, which should give me a unique list of the writers and a total of how many episodes each one is responsible for. Go ahead and save that step. And we can see that we now have a list of all of our writers and how many episodes they are responsible for. And you may notice here that we have 3 that pretty much look the same. That's just an error on my end in the data. There's like a space or something that makes it see them as distinct. And so I just didn't have time to go fix it. So just ignore that and pretend like there's only one of those, because it is supposed to be unique. But anyway, so now that we've identified the unique writers and how many episodes they wrote, we're looking for the top one. So again, I'll use my sort function. I'm going to sort on that episode count column in descending order, which should put the one at the highest number at the top. And again, we're going to grab that first in because we only want to keep that first row. Save our step. And now we've identified the writer with the most episodes and how many episodes that particular writer was responsible for. So we can save that calc. And we have 2 of our 3 variables that we needed. If we pop back over to our deck real quick, we know we've got the writer and we have the number of episodes by that particular top writer. Now all we need to do is get the total number of episodes from the series. So I'm going to come back to that same TV show data worksheet, create another new calc. And here I'll just call this one number of episodes. And there's different ways that you could go about doing this. You could say do an aggregation. And then if we look at this episode number column, that's numbering the episodes from the very first one, the pilot, all the way through to the finale. And the number would just incrementally increase. So if we're looking to see how many total number of episodes there were, we could do an aggregation. And we could say, let's look at that episode number column and give me the max value. That would give me the highest number, which would be the total number of episodes. Or I could also do an aggregation and say, look at the episode names and do a count of those episode names. That's going to give me the same number. Multiple ways that you can typically get to whatever data point you're looking for. Doesn't matter how you get there, as long as you get the right result. So I'll just do a count. And at this point, there were 67 episodes in the series in total. And then I'll just go ahead and save that.
Hey, Rob, like if you were going to do that for using nth, and it's like maybe you were still partway through the series and you're getting more data, and so maybe you're on the finals or you're on a season and they only have 10 episodes, and then you want to refresh the data, and maybe you were using nth and had it sorted descending so that you could see like, hey, the 10th episode number is at the top, and you were using that. When you refresh your data, will it automatically refresh and see like, hey, the next week now the highest is 11th? Will it know to like continue to sort all of that data now by like if you had an extra week of episodes in?
Yes, it will, because you're just telling it like go look at this column. What's the top one? It doesn't care if it's 10, 11, 100, whatever. Once the data refreshes, it's still just going to pull that top one.
Okay.
All right. One other thing I'll point out right here before I save this again. So we've now saved calcs in 2 different ways. We've saved some that look like this right here with the 1 column, 1 square. And we saved some with multiple columns that gave us multiple data points from one individual calc. I also mentioned earlier that you have the ability, say like in a filter step, to reference a calc in a different calc. So I could save a calculation and then I can create a new calculation and reference the previous one in the one I'm working on now. If you want to do that, you do have to save it as a single row, single column, as you see here. Any calc that you save with multiple columns or multiple rows cannot be used in, say, like a filter in another calc. It can't be referenced in any other calc. Only single row, single columns can be referenced in other calcs. Just wanted to point that out before I forgot. And we'll actually be doing that here in a minute, so it'll all tie together. So now we have essentially what we need. We've identified our top writer, how many episodes they were responsible for, and the total number of episodes in the series. So we have every bit of data that we need to fill in our insight. And so I could come out to the right tab and do just like we did before. I could say, let's just create a formula, and we'll divide the number of episodes of this top writer by the total number of episodes, and that would give us the percentage that we're looking for. But just to show you, other ways that we can go about that, again, there are usually multiple routes to the same destination. Instead of creating a formula, I could also do that calculation here in the calc builder. And so let's say I come back to this top writer calc that I previously created. And instead of copying that, I'm going to just edit the calc. And then now that I'm going to edit this, essentially what I'm going to do is I want to take this number of episodes from this top writer and divide it by the total number of episodes that I identified in that other calc that I just saved, the number of episodes. So I'm going to do a row aggregation. And I'm going to say we want to divide. You can see the various math operators we have here. I'm going to divide, and I'm going to say let's divide the number of episodes from this top writer. I'm going to add another value. And by default, it's going to ask me to pick a column from this table. But if I choose this type dropdown, you can also have the choice to insert your own custom value, or you can choose calc, which is where it'll let me reference one of those other calcs that I've already created. So here, I'll choose calc, and now I can say, let's divide that by that total number of episodes that I previously saved. And this also, you can see that we've saved about 5 or 6 different variables now, but only 3 are showing up here. So these are the ones that were saved as a single row, single column. Any of the ones that were multiple columns, such as the one about the number of deaths in the book, are not listed, cannot be used in reference because they had multiple columns. But this one here was a single column, number of episodes. Now we're going to divide the number of episodes from this writer by the total number, and that will give us the percentage that this writer is responsible for. And then when I do that, it's going to create a new column with the product of this aggregation, and it will be named what you see up here in the column name. And sometimes these auto-generated column names can get a little bit unwieldy. Essentially what it does is it takes the name of the first column, the operation that you're performing, the name of the other column, and adds that all together into some really big long column name that doesn't really mean much of anything to anyone. And so you can see that we can't edit this field. And so sometimes it's easier to delete that auto-generated name and give it a more friendlier name that actually has some meaning. So let's say we'll just call this % of episodes. And now I'll go ahead and save it. And now we've got a new column with the product of that aggregation. And I can save this calc, and we have all 3 data points that we need to complete that insight. So first we wanted to identify the writer. So we'll do insert data, and we'll pull our top writer. This is the first time we've inserted a text data variable. And so text options, you can see there's only one as opposed to number, which had many. The only thing you can format with your text variable is the capitalization. Do you want to keep it just like it is in your underlying worksheet, or you can capitalize first word, each word, the whole thing, or nothing. I'm going to say let's just keep it as it is in our data table. It'll insert. And now we want to insert the percentage of episodes. So that would be my top writer % of episodes variable. And because we're dealing with percentages, I want to make sure I multiply this by 100. And we can see that David Benioff and D.B. Weiss wrote 58% of the episodes, which was the most of any writer. And real quick, let's just get refresh that. And now we've got all of our examples showing up here in our dashboard. All right. So for our fourth question, or the fourth insight that we want to surface, we want to know how many battles did our most successful attacker king fight, and against how many defender kings did they wage these battles? So the first thing we need to identify here is who is our most successful attacker king. And then we want to know the number of unique kings that he fought against and the total number of battles that they waged. And we can write an insight that says, this person was the most successful king. He fought against this many defender kings and this many battles. And obviously, if you're trying to tie this back into, like, say, a real world work example, instead of the most successful attacker king, maybe we have the most successful salesperson or the most successful branch manager or whatever, and they sold this many dollars in this many deals instead of kings and battles. It all works the same, but kings and battles are more fun than sales and dollars.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Could have branch managers fighting battles and.
that's true. Maybe we could do like the Office Game of Thrones hybrid. All right. So here we go. We're looking for the most successful attacker king, the number of battles, and the defender kings. And of course, we're going to go back to our calculate to do that. So for this one, first thing I want to do is identify who is my best attacker king. And so I'm going to come up here to my attacker win percentage column or table. This one's super simple, just has a list of the kings and their win percentage when they are on the attacking side of a battle. And so if I want to find out who's my best king, aka who has the highest win percentage, I'm going to do a very similar set of operations that we've already done a few other times. I'm going to sort this win percentage in descending order. It's going to move it to the top. I'm going to grab my first in. And then here I only need the name of the attacker king. I don't really need his win percentage. So I'm going to say let's select and keep just that attacker king. I'm also going to use this attacker king as reference in an upcoming filter. So I want to make sure that I do save it as a single row, single column, because I know that I'm going to be doing that as well. If I wasn't going to be doing that, we wouldn't really have to do select. You could leave that number. It doesn't really matter. So you only really need to make sure you use select and narrow it down to 1 if you plan on using that as a reference in a different calc. And I'll call this our best attacker king. So we'll go ahead and save that. Now that we've identified our best attacker king, we need to identify how many defender kings he fought against and how many battles they waged amongst each other. So for that, I'm going to come down to my battle data worksheet. I'm going to create a new calc. And we can see that this particular worksheet has all sorts of data about battles that were fought. We can see the name of the battle, the attacker king, the defender king, the outcome from the attacker and defender perspective. We can see like what type of battle it was, where they fought it, how many people were in each army, were there major deaths, captures, did it occur in the summer or the winter, all that kind of stuff. So lots of information about all sorts of different battles. And for this particular calc, I'm looking for the defender kings and the number of battles fought by our best quote attacker king. So I'm just going to call this our best attacker king values. And so the first thing I want to do is narrow this table down so that I'm only seeing data that relates to our best attacker king, because we don't care about data from anyone else at this point. So here I'm going to use that filter function. I'm going to filter on our attacker king column, and I'm going to say, let's make sure that's equal to, and again, I'm going to change over to a calc, and I'm going to reference our previously identified best attacker king. And so once I save that, it's going to filter this to only show me battles where our best king was the attacker. And again, if this data happened to refresh and we got a new king enters the scene and he is way better than this guy and he has a much higher battle win percentage, because our filter here is saying identify our original calc that was identifying who this best attacker king is. Let me go back here. There we go. Our original calc that we're using for reference, this best attacker king, is just looking at the attacker column, sorting the win percentage by highest and choosing that first in. Doesn't matter how many new kings we add, whoever has the highest win percentage is always going to be at the top, always going to be that first in, and thus that's who our filter is always going to look at. So you can see again that refreshing or changing that data is not going to hurt. You don't have to go back and redo anything.
What if you had ties as the top?
Good question. So there will, in this one, let me see. Do we have a tie? No. So if there is a tie, that's where we typically would use branching to account for ties in our data. And we can choose how we want to display that, whether we want to write out, both people or one
Ah.
or the other. And so when we get into our session on Friday, we'll handle that exact scenario.
Okay.
But basically, you just do it with branching because it's going to change the structure of your sentence. Like for my insight that I have right now, I say, this person was the most successful king. If there was a tie, I could set up a branch to say, look at that data variable. If there are two, instead of saying was the most successful king, we would write X and Y were the most successful kings, plural, like that. So it'll look at the number. If there's only one, it would write it this way. If there are two, it would write the other version that has the plural and the little bit change the wording. Is essentially how you handle it.
Okay.
Or it depends on the wording of your sentence as well. We could write it in a way where if there is a tie, it would turn it into a list and it would just list out however many were there. There's a couple different ways to go about it, but again, we'll tackle all that on Friday.
All right.
That literal exact scenario. Okay, so we've identified our king and we filtered down so that all of our battles are about this one particular king. Next thing I want to know is how many unique defender kings did this person fight against? We happen to have a defender king column. So I'm going to use my group function again, which lets me pull the unique values from that column while also aggregating on a second column. So I'm going to say let's group by the defender king. So now it's going to give me my unique values there. And I'm going to do an aggregation on the battle name because that's a unique identifier here. And I'm just going to do a count of those battle names. So that'll give me the unique number of defender kings and a count of how many battles each one participated in. Go ahead and save that step. And there's my list of kings and how many battles they fought. And then to complete my insight, I don't really need all these names. I'm looking for the number of kings and the total number of battles that they fought. And so here I'm going to go ahead and do another aggregation. And I'm going to say, let's look at that defender king column. And we'll go ahead and just do a count of those. And I'm going to add a second aggregation. So you can add multiple aggregations to the same step. And then here I'm going to say, let's look at that number of battles and we'll do an add or a sum. So we'll count up the number of kings and we'll add up the number of battles, which should leave us with two numbers, the total number of kings and the total number of battles that they fought. Go ahead and save that. And I can now fill out my fourth insight. So here I'll say our best king. This is just text formatting. So again, same options that we saw. He fought against there we go. 3 defender kings in however many battles. I haven't showed you this, but you can see there's a search box here at the top. This is also searchable. We don't have a ton of variables going on right now, so it's pretty easy to scroll to the bottom. But when you start doing this for real, you might have 100, 150 different variables, who knows? And it gets quite a long list. And so you can start typing out the name of a variable and it will narrow down what you're looking for. And here's my number of battles. And we know that the Greyjoys, I don't know why I groups them together, were the most successful attacker king. We'll count them as one. Fought against 3 different defender kings in 7 total battles. All right, so our last one. Here we want to know what was our most imbalanced battle in terms of army size, and did our underdog win? And so this one we need to pull out 4 different variables and one little bit of math here, or a couple formulas really. First, we want to identify what is the most imbalanced battle. And we're going to define that as we're going to look at the attacking army, subtract that defending army size. And then we're going to look at the defending army, subtract the attacking army size. And then we're basically going to compare those numbers to see what's the most imbalanced battle, which one had the largest difference between the 2 army sizes. Once we've identified that most imbalanced battle, we need to know who fought in it, what was the outcome, and the difference in that army size. And we're going to write an insight that lays all that out. And I got a lot of placeholders in here, so it looks a little crazy. But X was the most imbalanced battle in which this person suffered either a win or a loss against this other person, despite having this many more men in his army. And of course, we're going to need to go back up here to our calc to start surfacing these data points. So the first thing I want to do is I want to identify that most imbalanced battle. So I'm going to come back down to that battle data worksheet, create a new calc. And again, to do that, I need to look at my attacker and defending army sizes, subtract one from the other, and we're going to compare them to one another. So first, let's just say I'll look at my attacker minus defender size. And this is that same worksheet that I just looked at, all the different battles, army sizes, and so on. And so here, it's also worth pointing out that you've probably noticed there are some null values here and there in my tables. Like when I look at my attacking and defending army sizes, we don't really have complete data for every single battle. Some we don't know the attacker, some we don't know the defender, some we don't have any data at all. And so to avoid errors in my calcs and to only look at battles that have complete data, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to filter this. And I'm going to say, let's make sure that attacking army size is not null. And I'm going to add a second filter and say, let's make sure that defending army size is also not null. So now we're only looking at battles that have complete data. And then I want to look at my attacker minus defender. Those are two different columns, so we can do a row aggregation. And we're going to do a subtract. And we're going to say, let's look at that attacking size, and let's subtract the defender size. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this column because, again, it's really long and doesn't really mean much. And so I'm going to call this size difference. Go ahead and save that step. And now if I look at my table way over here to the right, I have a new column, product of that aggregation. This shows me the size difference between these different armies. And so the next thing I want to do is I want to find out what's the largest number in that size difference. So I'm going to sort, and I'm going to sort on that new size difference column in descending order. That's going to put the one with the largest disparity at the top. And then I'm just going to grab my first in. And now we've identified the battle that had the largest difference between the two armies. And we can see that we have pretty much all the data points that we're looking for already here in this calc. But we also have some extraneous information we don't need. And so we'll use our select function and say we want to keep the attacker king. We want to keep the defender king because we need to know who fought. We need to know the outcome from the attacker's perspective because they're writing this from their perspective. So we write the attacker outcome. We want to put the battle name. And we wanted the size difference. So those are the 5 different data points that we had in our insight. Go ahead and save that. Everything else will go away. And here's what we need to know about this particular battle. So now I'm going to go ahead and save that calc. And then I want to do this from the defender side as well. And so I'm going to come back down to this battle data worksheet. And I'm just going to copy this calc that I just created. And instead of attacker minus defender, we'll say this is now defender minus attacker. And then all I need to do is I originally subtracted attacker from defender. And so if I come here to my aggregate row column, I can edit that step. Also point out, so we've edited steps a couple times now. You can see that you can go back into a calc, pick any step that you want. You can make changes to it. There's also this revert step option. If I choose that, it will revert me back to this aggregate row step and get rid of all the stuff that's down below. If you edit the step, it'll let you edit that step. Once you save it, it would then redo the other steps in the calc. So if you want to just change something and then perform the rest of the functions you already have, you would edit. If you want to go back to a certain spot and get rid of everything below, you would revert to that step. But in our case, we just need to do a simple edit. And instead of subtracting attacker or defender from attacker, we're just going to swap that around and say, let's now subtract attacker from defender. Save that step. It then executes the sort, the first and the select, and that leaves me with the 5 columns from the defender's point of view.
And you can still call that different size diff. You don't have to have like different variable names for those.
You mean for the column itself that was in the one I renamed?
Yeah. So like you had defender minus attacker and attacker minus defender. Like that's actual size difference was.
Oh yeah. I see. Yeah. So no, we don't need to. So the size difference, we don't need to change this because the way it's going to name the actual variable, if I pop out here and look, it's
Is
again, it does
total.
it does the calc name first and then the column name. So it would just have that, and then on the other side it would be the.
Gotcha. Okay.
There we go. Cool. All right. So now that we've done that, we've identified the battles from the attacking and the defending perspective. We're going to do our first really simple branch. We'll get way more in depth into branching on Friday, but just to show you kind of how it works and to give you a really simple branch to start off, I'm going to highlight this entire insight. I'm going to come up here to my add branch option. And when we add a branch or insert logic into our template, we're basically going to say, we're going to write out a rule and say, if this rule is true, then write whatever is below in this box. And we can have multiple rules. We're only going to do one right now, but we'll see next week we have branches with several different rules. And by default, it's going to write out the first rule that's true. So it looks at the first one. If it's true, that's what it writes. If not, it goes to number 2, number 3, and so on down the line until it hits the first one. That's what gets written. Now you do have the option to edit that as well. Instead of writing out the first rule that's true, maybe you want to write more than one. You could say the first 2 or 3 or however many there are. Or you could say write out all true rules, or you can say write out a random, write out however many random was. I don't ever see anybody do that really, but it is an option. Most of the time, people just leave it on, write out the first rule that is true. There's certain specific scenarios where you may want to change this. Like I say, we're writing out a bulleted list. A lot of times you'll change it to write all the rules that are true, so that it writes out all the different bullets or something like that. But generally, the first rule, the default, is what people go with. And then what I need to do here is when I click into the box, it'll show me all those same data variables that I've been working with. And I can use those to add some logic here on whatever I want to compare or look at. And so in this case, I'm going to say, let's take that attacker minus defender army size. And we're going to say, let's only write this if the attacker minus defender army size difference is greater than the defender minus attacker. So the attacking army size is greater than the defending army size. We're going to write this out. If that's not true, we're not going to write anything. If you do not add more than one rule, if this rule is not true, it's just not going to write anything, and you would have a blank in your narrative or in your insight. So you also need to keep that in mind. Unless you specifically want a blank, make sure your rules account for all the different scenarios that are possible. And so now here inside, if I hit done, it's going to take me back out to the main place where we've been working, and we can see that our entire insight is now blue, which lets me know that that is wrapped in a branch. And again, everything is color coded, which makes it really easy. Everything green is a data variable. Everything blue is a branch. And then once we add a synonym, they're going to show up purple, same color as that button. If I want to edit the branch, you can click into it. I can see the logic and then what's going to be written if that is true. And so now that I've set up to tell it only write it if this condition is true, I just need to plug in my variables. So this is the battle name. Here's our attacking king. So we want to put in our defender king, or no, our outcome. Then our defender king. And finally, our size difference. All right, and so now we can see that the Battle of Castle Black was the most imbalanced, in which Stannis Baratheon suffered a loss against Mance Rayder, despite having 98,000 more men in his army. So not great for that guy's battle. And again, if I hit done, it brings me back out, and now we can see everything that's in our branch. And if I come over here and refresh, everything's there. Cool. So that is the basics of the layout and the calc builder, how you surface and insert those data variables. Real quick, I'll show you synonyms. So we saw the inserting data, we saw adding branches. Let's say that I wanted to add a synonym here. If I go into I don't know.
One-sided.
Hey, there we go. I was trying to think of something. So imbalanced, we'll just say add another synonym, and we'll say it was the most one-sided. Perfect. And so the way this works is now that I've added two options here, each time it writes this insight, it's going to choose randomly between one of these two. So you got a 50-50 chance of one of those coming up. If you have one that you prefer more than the other, maybe I like imbalanced a little more, you can weight these as well. So I could insert imbalanced maybe like 3 times. Now we've got 3 out of 4 chance to get imbalanced, 1/4 chance to get one-sided. So you can weight those if you like ones over the others. You also don't have to do just individual words for synonyms. You can do whole sentences, paragraphs, phrases. I've even seen some people wrap entire templates in a synonym, and they'll have 2 or 3 kind of different versions that can just randomly be generated based on what synonym gets picked at that time. So you can get really crazy with synonyms beyond just adding single word options. We'll go over a little bit of that in the non-BI or non-Tableau training. There's not a lot. I don't see a lot of people using synonyms in the Tableau side, honestly. I just like to show you what it is and how it works. But I don't imagine for your Tableau insights, you're going to be using very many synonyms. For the non-Tableau, more narrative type of templates that people write, those synonyms become really, really important or really, really powerful. All right, so that is the basics of the functionality. 2 other things I'll show you here real quick, and then we can basically wrap it up. So there are a couple of tools that are good to know about as well. The first one up here in this little open tools icon, little wrench, is an outline. This is going to let me see an outline of my entire template. If you have logic or branching in your template, you can expand that out. You can see what the logic is and then what's going to be written. There's a show logic toggle here at the top, which will actually show me the logic that's being used, and then again what's being written if that is true. Same thing for synonyms. I can see all the different synonyms that I'm using, and then you'll notice these also kind of highlight. So if I see an error or I want to go change some kind of formatting or whatever, click on anything in that outline and it takes you right to that spot in your template. I can click on the number, I can format the number. If I click on the synonym, I can add more. If I click on the branch, I could update my logic. It'll take you exactly where you want to go. This is also searchable. So if you're looking for a specific word or phrase, put that in and it'll narrow it down to just what you're looking for. So the outline can be really helpful just to do some kind of QA and spelling check and all that. There's also a spell check, which is just your typical standard spell check. It'll check your spelling and suggest corrections. The other thing that is helpful is over here on the right side, which is the preview. This is going to give me a running preview of what is going to actually be written in the extension on Tableau. There's not much difference between it now because we only have one little basic branch. Everything else is just kind of static sentences. But we'll use this a lot more next week as well. Once we add branching, you can use the preview to see which branch is resolving as true and what option is being written for that particular insight. And you can actually use that in conjunction with what we call our data tester, which shows me all my variables that I have. And you can manipulate the data within the template without actually changing the underlying data to see how your branching works or if it works the way you expect. And so just to give you an idea, like right here in our last insight where we talk about this battle, we say that he suffered a loss against Mance Raider. But if I go look at my, and this is also searchable, so let's just say we'll search for outcome because I know that's what I'm looking for. My attacker outcome initially is a loss. Let's say I change that to a win. Then you can refresh your preview and we'll see that it now shows that he suffered a win. Not exactly right, but you get the idea. And then, or I could say where we have our branch to say if that attacker versus defender size difference, actually that might be a better example to show you. If this one is larger than, the attacker was larger than the defender, we're going to write this. So let's say we make the defender 99,999, which is now larger than the attacker. If I refresh, you'll notice that in the output, that final example completely disappears because again, we're only writing that if this is true. And now that I've changed it, it is no longer true. So it's not writing it out. If I reset and go back to it being true, it'll light up to show me green. Hey, this is the one that is true. And now if I refresh, it comes back. So you can use that data tester and the preview to test out your branching, make sure everything works the way you expect before you actually put it in production. So that's it for our questions. The only other thing is I will, as I mentioned, send you guys a little bit of homework once you're done. So it'll take about an hour for this recording to process and give me a link. Once I get it, I will send it over to you. The recording, the slide deck, the TWBX file, and I've got my note to also send you the T-Rex extension so you can add Wordsmith to your Tableau dashboard. And then along with that, I'll send you 4 questions that hopefully you'll have some time to complete before our training on Friday, just to give you some hands-on practice. Basically, these 4 questions are going to be very similar to the stuff that we did today. Again, I'm going to also send you that Game of Thrones dashboard so you can connect that up to your account just like I did in the beginning, and you'll have access to all those same worksheets, and you can answer the questions by using the calc builder to surface some data variables.